Our subject today is a baby's cry and a woman's heart. A baby's cry and a woman's heart. One of the most exciting and stimulating experiences in the lives of God's children is to anticipate the providential dealings of God in their lives. I know of nothing today that is quite as thrilling as that, and then to recognize and to trace God's providential dealings with us as we look back upon the past. The providence of God in the lives of His children reach actually into the minutest details, and it extends into all the ramifications and intricacies of our lives. There is no detail too small but what the providence of God is not revealed. May I give a very simple one, and maybe to you very meaningless one. I was coming back from Atlanta, Georgia, from meetings 2 or 3 years ago. I made a train connection in New Orleans. The train I came in on was late. It was a rainy night. If you've ever been in New Orleans, even when the sun is shining, it always seems to me like a foreign country. It never seems like a southern city to me. But I walked from the station uptown. I felt actually very lonesome, to tell the truth, and I was going to eat dinner. And as if by arrangement, I met the Harold Tompkins family right in front of a store. It could not have been arranged any better if we had arranged to meet there. And I had a feeling that since they were going back east, that they felt a little lonesome that evening. And we had a very wonderful time together. I did know a little something about New Orleans from the past and could take them through the French Quarter and show them some places there. And then they saved me a taxi fare because it started raining, and they took me back to the station. You say, well, that doesn't amount to much. Sure, it doesn't amount to much. But may I say, that's God's providential dealings in our lives. And it reaches down to the minutest details of our lives. Now, the Word of God contains many such instances, but these have far-reaching results. We've already seen this in the book of Genesis. Abraham sent his servant yonder to the land of Haran in order that he might get a bride for his son Isaac. And this servant, a stranger in a foreign land, comes to a well where he'd never been before, and he pauses and prays, and he says, "Oh God, I do not know where to turn. I'm sent back to get a bride for my master's son, and I do not know where to turn. And lead me this day." And God, by His providence, sent Rebekah down to that well. There were hundreds of wells in that country. They could have met anywhere. You can call that chance. Somebody would say that, well, you're meeting in New Orleans. That's chance. No, it's not. May I say it's the providential dealings of God in our lives. Again, in the life of Joseph. We've not had opportunity to talk much about Joseph. We shall tonight. By the way, that's a clue we give you. The land of Egypt was where he spent most of his life. He's the hard luck boy of the Bible. Sold by his own brethren into slavery. And he's making his way to the top because he was a man of ability and God was with him. And as he was working his way to the top, he's falsely accused, put into prison. And then the one opportunity of getting out of that prison, he interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker of Pharaoh. He said to the butler, "Don't forget me." Butler says, "I won't forget you." He did forget him. 2 years went by, and poor Joseph said, "My God's forgotten me." But may I say, by God's providential dealings, the butler forgot. because 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream. And the butler says, "Oh my, I'd forgotten all about this fella. That was the very one that interpreted my dream in prison." And it was by that method that Joseph was brought out and was made second to Pharaoh. God's providential dealings. Now, may I say that there's no greater evidence of the providence of God than at the birth of Moses. I do not believe you could go anywhere and find a better example of the providence of God. And the story begins just that way. There went a man of the house of Levi, took to wife a daughter of Levi. What's their names? Well, their names are not even given. Oh, a little later on, when the family of Moses and Aaron is being given, we find out it's Amram and Jochebed. But here, two unknown people of the tribe of Levi. A woman, a man. Same old story. It's been repeated millions of times. They fell in love with each other. They got married. And God starts that way. In obscurity, God begins to move. God always begins with the commonplace. That's the difference between God and man. May I say to you, man has to have a big stage set. He has to have publicity. He has to have these Klieg lights. He has to have a blaring horn. But God begins with the commonplace. That's the way He began the New Testament. A girl, or her name is Mary, in the town of Nazareth. She is a peasant. A carpenter by the name of Joseph. Same old story. They fell in love. Gets monotonous, doesn't it? They fall in love and they are engaged. And what happened? God begins with the commonplace. And you'd think that the birth of Jesus would be something spectacular. Now, we try to make it spectacular. But friends, there weren't but just a few shepherds there. Wise men didn't get there till months later. Very few knew about it. And it was in a stable. Not a nice, clean stable that Robertson fixes up in their window every year, but an old smelly stable where oxen and sheep and other animals were. And I don't think it had been cleaned out either. That's where God began. Always begins with the commonplace. And here is where our story begins. A man of the tribe of Levi and a woman of the tribe of Levi. They fall in love. They get engaged. They get married. And then the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. May I say, we're still in the realm of the commonplace. We're still dealing with that which is insignificant. And men today despise that which is small, that which is insignificant, that which is lowly, that which is trivial, that which is minute detail. They don't like that which is inconspicuous. They don't like that which is mean and miserable. A week ago, yesterday, I came across the southern part of Wyoming on the city of Los Angeles. And I want to tell you that song about a little ranch in Wyoming, you can have it. There's nothing romantic about that little old lean-to stuck out there on that prairie with snow all around it and some, skinny cattle. Not even a place for them to go. Not much of a place for the people to go. And as I looked out there, I thought, there may be a little fella out there somewhere God's going to use someday. I know one thing, He's not going to start in a big way. He never has. He never has started that way. He always begins with that which is little, that which is inconspicuous. But you see, something happened when this little boy was born to this unknown couple at this time. Fine-looking boy, by the way. And Pharaoh had given the edict that the male children would be put to death. And these parents, of course, they didn't want to kill their little boy. But after 3 months, this boy Moses, he developed a fine pair of lungs. And you could hear him down in the next block. And therefore, something had to be done about him. And actually, the mother was forced to adopt a very desperate and a hazardous procedure. She made a little ark. It's quite interesting. When you read the story of the ark that Noah built, remember Moses wrote about that, and when you read the Ark of the Covenant that's in the tabernacle later on, remember Moses wrote about that, and he's the boy that was sort of an expert on arks. He'd spent time as a little baby in one. And so his mother made a little ark, and she put him in it, and she put him down in the bullrushes, these flags. They were actually the paper flags that the prophet Isaiah said would disappear from the Nile River, and you can't find one of them today, and Egypt was noted for them in this day, and they were all along the river, and so she took him down and put him there, and put him in a very conspicuous spot. However, she hid him. She put him down in a strategic place. Now, what she did was hazardous, but it was not haphazard. And I think God's children today can learn a lesson from this. I hear a great deal of, well, if I may adopt the language of the hour, I hear a lot of crazy talk today about God's will on the part of God's people today. I do not think God's going to lead you to do something that is outlandish and crazy today to demonstrate that you happen to be an unusual individual. Now, this is forced on this mother. But she's doing a hazardous thing, but it's not haphazard. She knew where Pharaoh's daughter came down to take a bath. That's where she put Moses. And she didn't leave him there. She put Miriam, his big sister, down there to watch him. And that's the reason Moses in the wilderness had trouble with Miriam. Remember a little later on, Miriam says, the idea of my little brother taking all this on himself. He thinks that he's the only one around here that knows anything. God had to teach her a lesson, because she's one of the first women that wanted to be a preacher. God dealt with her. He made her a leper, because she could say, I knew him when he was nothing. And if it hadn't been for me down there at the bullrushes, where'd he be today? That's true. It was all true. He's placed down in a strategic place, and Miriam, his sister, she stands by, she watches. And according to schedule, Saturday night, Pharaoh's daughter comes down for a bath. Now, the historian and the archaeologist think they've identified this queen. I have not read this in several years, but several years ago I read a chapter in a very fine book on archaeology about this woman. They even today have her name, and to tell the truth, they have her picture. She never married. She was a woman of remarkable ability. A woman that was very forthright, made decisions, was an outstanding queen in Egypt. She had an adopted son who never became Pharaoh after her. That's Moses. Now, this woman, remarkable ability. Fact of the matter is, the historian feels that she's rather a cold-blooded person. She came down to the river Nile to bathe. Let me read this. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. When she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Now, when all the maidens that belonged to her court came down, they went around and looked through the bulrushes, and honestly, I think they were looking for peeping Toms. They were searching the whole neighborhood, because everybody knew this is where Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe. And so they search out the entire area. And then Pharaoh's daughter is told, there's an ark down there and a little baby's in it. Remarkable thing, isn't it? And the little baby's brought to her. She says, go and fetch it. Let's see him. And when she had opened it, that is this little ark, and Mother covered him up well, and when she'd opened it, she saw the child. Behold, the babe wept. God pinched him at the right time. And little Moses began to weep. And my friend, this woman, though in history it is said she had a cold heart, she was a cold-blooded ruler, she's a woman. She has a woman's heart. And God made the woman's heart. And God made the little baby. And God made the little baby's cry. And God brings together a woman's heart and a baby's cry. Providence. And He changes the destiny of a nation and saves His people. Little things. God always uses the little things, and the difficulty with many of us is we are looking for God to do something big in our lives. And most of us are pretty little for God to do something big, aren't we? A friend of mine said to me not long ago, he says, you know, the trouble today is that most Christians expect $1 million answer to a 10-cent prayer. And that's true. Many of us today expecting God to do something big, and we forget that He's moving maybe that little thing that happened in your life this past week. If you had had spiritual insight, you would have known that was God speaking to you. It was God leading you. And a great many this morning are out of God's will because they're still looking for something big. I know a couple. They were in my class this year. They're still in Southern California. They've been going as missionaries now for, 15 years. They haven't got to the field. And they won't be at the field the next time you hear from them. And you know why? God's going to have to write it in the sky for them. Letters of fire. He's got to say to them, either in a dream or in letters of fire, go! And if He'll do that, they'll go. But He's not going to do that. He didn't even do that for Moses. A man and a woman of the tribe of Levi. At this stage, we don't even know who they are. It doesn't make any difference. Insignificant. Commonplace. They have a baby boy. That's nothing new. They can't hide him. They take him after 3 months. She puts him down at the water's edge. Pharaoh's daughter, a woman, looks in. God pinches the baby. Little old Moses weeps. That got her heart. That got her heart. Miriam is standing by, friends, and I mean she's standing by for a purpose. Listen to her. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? You talk about suggestion. That was a suggestion. Pharaoh's daughter still looking at the little fella. If history says she was quite a dominant person, but she's got a woman's heart. And that little fella crying, 3 months old. Do you think she'd kill him? Mm-mm. Not that little fella. He's already got his little hands around her heart. And God will use that to accomplish His purpose. Now, will you notice, that's not the most remarkable thing. It gets better as we go along. Pharaoh's daughter said, "There go. Sure. I don't intend to kill the little fella. Got to have somebody to nurse him." And the maid went and called the child's mother. Now she's going to be paid for nursing her own baby. You can't beat that arrangement. May I say to you, the providence of God in the lives of these simple folk, insignificant folk, folk that are in slavery, God is moving. He's drawn out this little fella. In fact, that's the name that Pharaoh's daughter, she says, "What'll I call him?" And they always gave names then. It meant something. She says, "Well, I drew him out of the Nile. I do not know who his mother and father are. I drew him out of the Nile. That's what we'll call him, Moses." And that's what it means. I drew him out of the Nile. Drawn out. And that's, may I say, that's life from the dead, if you please. Because he was a dead little boy if the providence of God had not worked in his behalf. Now, that doesn't conclude it all. In verse 10, "And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son." Had Moses stayed in the land of Egypt, the writer to the Hebrews said that he forsook all of the glories and the riches of Egypt, he would have been the next Pharaoh on the throne. And as we're going to see tonight, there was a definite reason for that at this particular time. He would have been the next Pharaoh on the throne. He gave up a throne. He gave up all of that in order that he might become the deliverer of God's people. Now he's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses leaves out now all of that period of his life, the first 40 years, that candidly, I wish he hadn't left out. He doesn't give us any detail at all about his youth. We do not know how he was brought up. You can only speculate. And we have some scripture, though, to base some of our speculation on. Moses himself bypasses it modestly. He detours around his life at this particular juncture. But fortunately, Stephen, when he was speaking before the Sanhedrin, reviewed their history, and he dwelt a great deal upon the life of Moses. I want to turn now and let Stephen tell you about those years. I turn to the 7th chapter of the book of Acts, and I want to begin reading at verse 20. Will you listen now very carefully? "In which time Moses was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. When he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son." Now, you may be inclined to want to pass this by. Don't pass it by. I want to emphasize this. "And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds." There are two men in the Bible whose IQ, I think, is higher than any other two men that have ever walked this earth. They were both trained in the formal schools of their day, and they were the product of their age. Intellectual giants. One was Moses and the other was Paul the Apostle. Now, maybe this morning you're not impressed by the wisdom of Egypt. And if we don't know something about it, how would we be impressed? May I say that the Egyptians accumulated a vast amount of knowledge, and after all, our age is merely built on the past. Other men have labored, and we've entered into their labors. We are beneficiaries this morning of the past. And right now, the historians that are going in a new direction, they are beginning now to say that the Greek civilization owed a great deal to the Egyptian civilization. And today that Greek civilization still stands out as being the greatest that's ever appeared on this earth. Now, Egypt knew a great many things. They had a library that later on became world famous. Books written in hieroglyphics. It preserved some of the vast amount of knowledge they had. They had a university in that day. It was called the Temple of the Sun. It was pagan, but it's not any more pagan than our state universities today. Moses evidently was a graduate of this university. He was learned, Stephen says, in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He had to be a graduate of that university. It was a day of wealth and luxury and leisure that always produces a man-made worldly culture. The Egyptians developed painting and music and poetry, architecture. May I say the pyramids today are just a small segment of what they did in that day. Still baffles men today in this machine age just how they did it. They did it, though. They had tremendous abilities. They developed mathematics. Astronomy, they knew the distance to the sun. And if you think they thought the world was flat, that was our scientists that started off with that. They knew it was round. They knew the distance to the sun. They had sciences such as chemistry. You want to know how well their chemistry was? They had an embalming process. The undertakers would like to know something about it even today. They had pigments in their paint that today is as bright as it was apparently the day it was put on. Sherwin-Williams would sure like to have that formula. May I say to you that they had a postal system. The letters found at Oxyrhynchus have been found much later. They come even to the time of the New Testament. But all of those letters reveal that a postal system had come down through the Egyptian system. Well, they didn't have to continue to raise the postal rates to stay out of the red. It's too bad the Democrats and the Republicans both can't find out how they did it, but they did it. Moses was a product of that culture. Did you notice what was said back here? When he fled Egypt and went down, it said that they said an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds. When Moses left the country, he was recognized as an Egyptian, for that was what he was. If Moses were here this morning, I don't think that he could drive a car. I don't think he could put in a telephone call. I don't think he could turn on the radio, and I don't think he could turn on the TV. But we sure got a lot of morons today that can do that. That doesn't prove anything. Moses could carry on an intelligent conversation today with the eggheads of the present hour. Oh, he couldn't open a can of beans. But he knew a few things himself. He was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. But I want you to notice something now. with all the training and education that he had in the first 40 years of his life, God could not use him. That's important. Will you listen to this? Stephen, in Acts 7, verse 25, for he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. This man was 40 years off of schedule. God couldn't use him because with all of the intelligence of Egypt, he had a course in economics. He knew, I think, something about Fabian socialism. He had a course in philosophy. And he reasoned like this. He said, now, I think maybe we ought to have a peace corps. And I probably, being the next Pharaoh, I ought to spearhead it. And these, my brethren, need some help. And I'm going to give them foreign aid. So he went down to help his brethren. He supposed they would understand, but they didn't understand because Moses didn't know enough. And he didn't know enough for God to use him. His deductions were wrong. He couldn't solve life's problems. He wasn't a vessel fit for the Master's service. Doesn't this lay in the dust our exalted notions that a modern education is all that's needed today? God sent this man out to the backside of the desert and gave him a 40 years postgraduate course and gave him a BD degree, backside of the desert degree. And that was the most important period of Moses' life. So important that this man, who trained with the wisdom of this world, steps out and says, I'm able to deliver God's people, but he's not able. After 40 years out yonder in the wilderness, God comes to him at the burning bush and says, Moses, I'm ready. Moses says, I'm not. I'm not able to do it. God says that, oh, you are ready for graduation. That's what I wanted you to see. If you are not ready, I can use you. That's the trouble today. We got too many that think they can do it. God trained it. God's method. And His method is a contrast to ours. God always did that. He sent Elijah out to the brook Cherith, gave him a little course. He sent Ezekiel down by the river Kibar. He put Paul in Arabia. He sent John to the Isle of Patmos. And even our blessed Lord spent 30 years in obscurity. The difficulty is we are too smart for God to use us. And some of us are too strong and too smart for God to save us. We know too much. We have too much ability. Will you listen? Paul, and I'll put him up against any egghead anywhere. I only wish Mr. Kennedy could get one like Paul. I'm not discussing politics. I wish Mr. Eisenhower could have had one too. Will you listen to this man? For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. Under the Jews a stumbling block, and under the Greeks foolishness. The Jews had a religion, and they went through a ritual. It gave to them character. It gave to them status. And they said, we don't need the cross. We can do it ourselves. We have a religion. The Greeks were those who had gone after philosophy. They said, we are able to do it. And to them the cross was foolishness. And to the Jews it was a stumbling block. But Paul says, unto them which are called, not just those invited, but those who really heard, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Among the Jews and among the Greeks, there was another class. They didn't depend on ritual. They didn't depend on what they did. They didn't depend upon their own wisdom. They saw themselves undone and helpless. And when they went to the cross, they found salvation. And some of you can't be saved because you're too smart. You know too much. And you're too strong. You've got ability. You are not ready to cast yourself upon a Christ that died for you. And that's the only way God will save you. You have to come to Him. Oh, how smart we've become. May I say this? Pass on. I'm disturbed today what's happening in even our fundamental circles. I've been hearing, Dr. Woodbridge said this when he was here with us. I heard it back at Wheaton a couple of weeks ago. We have a group of young professors today. They honestly don't know what they know, but they think they know a great deal. And they like to use this expression, the Bible Institute mentality. What they mean is they are graduates of colleges and of seminaries. May I say to you, I'm a graduate of a college and a seminary also. Oh, don't misunderstand me. We become a fool when we boast. I'll stand up to any of them. I told a young professor at Wheaton the other day, I'll stand up to you, brother. Let me say this to you this morning. I wish we had today more men who have the Bible Institute mentality, who will not boast that they're college graduates and seminary graduates, but that they know Him. And I said to this young professor, I wish that you not only had the Bible Institute mentality, I wish you had the Bible Institute heart. I says it's interesting that no seminary, either fundamental or liberal, in the past 25 years has turned out a great preacher. Not a one. Boy, would some of these seminaries love to claim Billy Graham. Well, he didn't graduate from any of them. God fooled all the seminaries and raised up a man that didn't even graduate from a seminary. My friend, don't misunderstand me. I took a young man, or at least he took me, I should say, to the train in Chicago. He's a graduate of a so-called fundamental seminary. He said, Dr. McGee, I want to talk with you. He said, you know, I've been looking down on prophecy. My seminary told me to do that. He said, I've been out now just 2 or 3 years and find out how ignorant I am. And I said to him, thank God for that. When you find out how ignorant you really are, God can use you. But you got to find out how ignorant you are. And he says, oh, just like a little baby. What a smarty he was 2 or 3 years ago. He says, just tell me how to begin in the study of prophecy. Oh, I said, boy, you're going to go places. when God can knock it out of you. It took him 40 years to get Egypt out of Moses, but when he did, the man says, I can't do it, and God says, now you can do it. My, how God's going to have to knock it out of some of us today. We are too smart. We know too much. Now, this is not to despise training and education. This just means to say, let's not put the emphasis there as if that's all that's necessary. I'm afraid today of this movement today of trying to make all Christians college graduates and seminary graduates, and they do not have a passion for Christ. They don't love that book. And it's no accident that none of them have turned out a preacher in 25 years. It's time some of them are getting down on their faces and confessing. The Bible doesn't despise real wisdom. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. With all thy getting, get understanding. It needs to be put in its proper place today. Oh, my friend, today, are you too smart for God to use you? This young preacher, 3 years, top man in his class. Oh, I knew him when he graduated. He came down here to straighten me out one Sunday, and I'm hard to straighten out, as you well know. I told him I've gone too far to be straightened out. I need straightening out, but I said, you're not the boy to do it. Now he says, just give me something that's the primer, something to begin. Oh, my friend, this morning, are you too strong today for God to save you? One of the great fallacies of the present hour, it's the strong delusion of modern man that today intelligence and training and method is all that's necessary. I tell you, we need the power of God today. We need today to have Him on the scene. Your best resolutions must wholly be waived, your highest ambitions be crossed. You need never think you'll ever be saved till first you've learned you're lost. You are here today, and you are tuned in today by the providence of God. That's the reason you're here this morning. What about it? He put you here this morning to hear this message for a purpose. I don't know why, but you're here. And you're listening in today. Many of you, because it's a bad day, and we've got a tremendous radio audience today. My friend listening in today, you're listening in because of the providence of God. And you know, if it wasn't for the providence of God, I'd quit preaching. The first time I ever preached at the Church of the Open Door was in 1939, and none of you remember it, because I made about as small a splash as anybody ever made in this pulpit. I was out here on a vacation. I preached on a Sunday night. There was not many here. Don't blame them. But I remember sitting, I'm almost sure it's where Brother Danny Rose is sitting this morning. Third row, right on the aisle. Was a lady, very distinguished looking, very large, very well dressed. And she stood out because she was that type person, and there was no one else sitting in her immediate vicinity. And I preached one of my usual messages that night, and we asked for hands to be put up, and her hand was the first hand that went up. Do you remember Ms. Redmond, who was here? Ms. Redmond, there was a prayer thing down here, penitent form they called it. Ms. Redmond came to deal with her here, and then so much disturbance, she took her over there. The next day she told me this story. This woman came here to California. I do not know whether it was because of a son or a husband. I don't remember details. But because of the son or husband, and she had had a great sorrow because of whichever one it was, and her mission had failed. She went back to take the train, checked out of the hotel, and had about 3 hours before the train left that evening. She walked all the way from the Union Station up into this area. She heard the chimes, and I expect Brother Gordon Hooker was the one playing them. She heard the chimes, and she tried to find the church. She went up 5th Street, but hope, doesn't go through it. Dead ends here at the library. She couldn't find her way in, and so she had to turn around. She came back, and she told about how much trouble she had finding her way here to the Church of the Open Door. And she didn't know who was preaching. She just heard church chimes. It's fortunate, I guess, she didn't, because she came in and sat down. 3rd row there. She had contemplated suicide. She came in here in desperation. But it was the providence of God that a little country preacher from Texas preached that night, and she happened to be here that night. She accepted Christ as her Savior. Miss Redmond told me that she had a letter from her afterward. And she says, my trip to California was not a failure. Here by the providence of God. That's the reason I preach. Because God, through His providence, has brought you here. Maybe you're smart today. Maybe you're here because you're clever. Maybe you're here because you're strong. But my friend, this morning, if you can see that you do not have the wisdom nor the strength to save yourself, and you'll cast yourself on Him, you'll be saved.